Gundam Narrative is a movie that came out in 2018 as part of Sunrise UC Next 100, a project that wanted to celebrate how the Gundam continuity was slowly approaching the 100th year of the Universal Century Calendar, if we ignore F91 and Victory. Gundam Unicorn happens in UC 0096, Narrative in UC 0097, and the now released Hathaway takes place in UC 105. A lot of people were quite excited for Narrative since it was going to be a new original story that maybe could fill in the gaps between Unicorn and Hathaway's Flash. Later, we learned that in fact it was going to be adapting Fukui's novel Phoenix Hunting, a kind of side story that more or less happens at the same time of the final battle of the Laplace conflict. And here's where things get kind of messy. The movie and the novel are very different. To be more clear, the movie kind of grabs the concepts of the third Unicorn mobile suit called Phoenix, the presence of the sleeves, and the Federation trying to catch the Phoenix, but actually tells a totally new story that tries to explain new type abilities, psychoframe powers, and even shed a little bit more light to what happened at the end of Unicorn. You know, those time traveling shenanigans. And that is okay, right? Well, in theory. The problem is that in practice, the whole narrative was plagued by recycled story beats and even unoriginal mobile suits that really felt more like a way to continue to milk the molds of previous kits, just with a different color. To give a little more perspective, I'm going to divide this exploration in 3 parts. First, how Gundam NT was conceived and the ideas that the movie wanted to explore and expand, particularly those that existed in other media. Second, what really happened in the movie and how it kinda fell short. And finally, what I would have liked for the movie to explore. Having said that, my name is Absa, and before we dive into Gundam Narrative, as per usual, there will be major spoilers in this video, so if you haven't seen Gundam NT, Unicorn, Char's Counterattack, the original Mobile Suit Gundam, Zeta or Double Zeta, well, I don't know what you're doing here, but I'll try my best to explain Narrative without ruining the entirety of the experience. So, let's go on to the background story of Gundam NT. Prior to release of the movie, there had been some stories where the third Unicorn model was not only revealed but also given better context. The first one was a 2013 Gundam Tokyo Front exclusive short movie called Mobile Suit Gundam UC 1 of 72, written by none other than Harutoshi Fukui. The movie's name is alluding to the 72 demons of the Ars Goetia, Phoenix being one of those 72 entities, and I have to say it's a nice little detail that the third Unicorn unit is named after a demon that looks like a phoenix, given the fact that the mobile suit itself looks like a phoenix and acts like a demon when in destroy mode. It also helps that the name Phoenix sounds a lot like Phoenix, so there's no room for confusion. Now, the story of 1 of 72 was very simple. On UC 0095, several months before the events of Unicorn, the Federation, joined by Anaheim Electronics, wanted to test 2 experimental mobile suits, Anaheim's RX-0 Unicorn Gundam 2 Banshee and the Federation's RX-0 Unicorn Gundam 3 Phoenix. What we need to know here is that the Unicorns were part of the UC project, a mobile suit development project between the Federation, Anaheim, and the Beast Foundation. Officially, only the Unicorn and the Banshee exist, but the Federation secretly built the Phoenix because they were not so keen on the antics of the Beast Foundation. So, the test was going to be a live combat trial with both the Banshee and the Phoenix attacking a Neo Zeon fleet that was approaching the sector. Obviously, Neo Zeon took notice and deployed their Rebabu to stop the attack. The problem began when the Rebabu separated and started emitting psycho energy, causing the Banshee to activate the entity system and go into destroy mode. After seeing that, one of the Federation officers watching the test wanted to activate the Phoenix destroy mode also, but the other officer had the information that 2 machines in destroy mode could cause a psychoframe resonance phenomena, a mini axis shock if you will, and the Federation officer, being a Federation officer, ignored the information. So the Phoenix went into destroy mode, and to the surprise of no one, there was a resonance between the two unicorns. The thing is that there were catastrophic consequences to that, since the Phoenix started to attack the Banshee instead of the Rebawu. The Banshee and the Rebawu retreated, but the Phoenix stayed in this demoniacal destroy mode, and with no opponent left, the third unicorn went for the Federation battleship and completely destroyed it. After that, the Phoenix flew away, never to be seen again. That's more or less the highlight of the story. What's really interesting is that there's a concept art where the Phoenix was going to sport the same color scheme as the RX-93 new Gundam, and it looks super interesting, except the destroy mode, which glows in a golden color. One thing to note here is that the armed armor DE shields or the wings do not have the little flowing tail yet. That would be added in the movie. There's also another cameo of the third unicorn in the manga Mobile Suit Gundam UC-96 Last Sun, the sequel to UC-94 Across the Sky. While it's not really the main focus of the manga, the Phoenix plays an important role because the story more or less happens at the time of the events of 1 of 72. The true important part here is that depiction of the Phoenix displayed an ability never before seen, the activation of the Unchained mode, which may or may not be a nod to Makinami's Sabisto mode. Nah, just kidding. In reality, this mode first appeared in the Perfect Grade Unicorn Gundam, and it made its way into the story as a very brutal next level destroyed mode. Unchained destroyed mode supposedly activates when the level of synchronization between the new type and the RX-0 is superbly high. The NTD then removes all limiters and safety measures and starts to treat the pilot as another component of the whole system. This is very reminiscent to the Arashiki or Alana Vijana system from Iron-Blooded Orphans, where pilots could allow for the machine to take over. Anyway, in this story, the Phoenix status as a mythical mobile suit, its abilities and even powers are greatly expanded. It even features a different pilot, but the sad part is that to this day, none of that has appeared in another media. More or less like 6 years after the final volume of Gundam Unicorn, Fukui returned to that world with what is now considered the final 11th volume of Gundam UC, a novel called Phoenix Hunting. This novel is an expansion of his previous story of the Phoenix. In fact, we can almost say that 1 of 72 was sort of the prototype story and Phoenix Hunting is the official complete version. This is the story that was super loosely adapted to form the basis of Gundam NT. It's here in Phoenix Hunting where we learn more about the pilot of the Phoenix. She is revealed as a cyber new type girl named Rita Bernal, who was orphaned by Operation British. You know, the original colony drop on Sydney. After the catastrophe, Rita moved to North America and was then given to the Titan's new type labs for experimentation, making her one of the first cyber new types like Ford and Rosamia. Many years later, she was assigned to pilot the Phoenix in the joint test of the Federation in Anaheim, and the story more or less stayed the same, with the final reveal that at some point in time, Rita and the Phoenix synchronization was so great that she lost her physical body and transcended to a different plane of existence with the mobile suit as her container vessel. And now that I say that, added to the extra depiction of the Unchained mode, I don't know if it was intentional or coincidental, but the Phoenix has a very Evangelion-esque vibe and powers to it. Anyway, the story then goes on to explain how there was a secret Federation operation who was in charge of capturing the runaway Phoenix. The Shazar unit is where we can find protagonist Jonah Basta, as he is part of the crew. The problem was that there were still some remnants of the slaves, so it wasn't easy to get to the Phoenix. That and well, the fact that the Phoenix was a sentient mobile suit without any biological restrictions. So, up to this moment and before the movie, we have had quite a few appearances of the Phoenix with different power levels and abilities and even different pilots. It made sense for Rita to stay as the pilot of the Phoenix instead of the other pilot from the manga, since the novel was written by the original author, even though the addition of the Unchained destroyed mode was something that could have been added to the story. And here is where things get a little bit more messy, again. The depiction of the final battle between Full Frontal and Vanagi, in other words the Sinanjo versus the Unicorn, is very different in the original novel and the OVAs. In the novel there is no Neo Zeong, only Full Frontal's super menacing giant aura, whereas in the OVAs the Neo Zeong is used to demonstrate Frontal's power in a very physical and tangible way, not so new typey and magical. But remember how all of Universal Century stories give feedback to themselves? Well, in Phoenix Hunting, Fukui justified the absence of the Neo Zeong by it being stopped by the secret Caesar unit. As they were searching for the Phoenix, they discovered a warship transporting the unpiloted mobile armor. Jonah then realizes that the third Unicorn led them there to find this evil beast of mobile armor, so all of the Caesar team unite to destroy the battleship. The problem is that a Jackdaga survives and manages to dock with the Neo Zeong. It's then revealed that the one actually controlling the Neo Zeong is none other than Full Frontal, using the pilot just as a vessel to control it remotely, similar to the way he was controlling other mobile suits with the Psycho Shards in the OVAs. What follows next is a battle that happens similarly to what happened between the Neo Zeong and the Unicorn in the OVAs. Just that instead of the Unicorn, we have the Phoenix, and instead of Banagi, we have Jonah. So, considering that that ending already happened in the OVAs, the ending of Gundam NT had to be changed, right? Right? Oh, and one last thing. In one interview, Fukui also addressed that with Gundam NT, he wanted to show what exactly happened with psychoframe technology and newtypes so that, in accordance to Tomino's original UC timeline, by the era of Mafti, F91 and Victory, there was no trace of those concepts. In another interview, movie director Yoshizawa Suniichi and producer Ogata Naohiro said that they agreed on using Phoenix Hunting as a motive or starting point, but ultimately decided to rewrite some parts in order to bring in a new main character and change some things. They thought about naming it Unicorn 2 or Unicorn 1.5, so that it was easier to connect to the previous series, but they then decided to go with Gundam NT because it's a new narrative added to the Universal Century timeline. It also helps that NT are also the letters used to shorten the word newtype, another main element that Fukui wanted to explore in much more depth in the movie. So, to say that this movie was ambitious is really an understatement. It was really intended to close all of the plot elements of previous Universal Century story threads and even pave the way for the disappearance of all of the concepts that were introduced in Gundam Unicorn. The question is, did Gundam NT achieve all that it was supposed to accomplish? Let's find out. The answer to the previous question depends on who you ask. Many people liked the movie, many people didn't like it. I found it to be repetitive. It's not that the concepts are bad. It's just that they are played out very similar to Unicorn, just with different names and colors. Gundam NT starts 1 year after the Laplace Incident with a secret Federation unit in charge of capturing a rogue mobile suit. This is Operation Phoenix Hunt, led by Yago from the Caesar team, with Jonah Basta as an added bonus thanks to the request of Louis & Co., a company very closely related to the Federation. The Caesar task force was assigned with the capturing of the Phoenix, the problematic third Unicorn piloted by Cybernewtype Rita from the Titans labs. Assisting the Caesar team in the operation is the generous Louis & Co., who is helping them with an experimental mobile suit repurposed from Anaheim Electronics, the Gundam NT. Supposedly, the NT is a prototype mobile suit that was the psychoframe testbed for the legendary RX-93. As is, the Gundam NT is a very unprotected and skinny mobile suit, but Louis & Co. developed a couple of add-on armaments to be more effective in combat and other operations. And to this point, everything sounds awesome. Louis & Co. and the Titans are a callback to Zeta. The Gundam NT is a callback to the new Gundam from Char's Counterattack, and the Phoenix has a direct connection to Unicorn. We also have the desperate remnants of the Sleeves, who, like Louis and Co., also want to harness the power of the Golden Phoenix. And what power am I talking about? Well, the power to transcend time and death. Here in narrative we learn that when the Unicorn awakened, that mobile suit was able to turn back time. That's how it deactivated all of the mobile suits with a Hathaway after stopping the colony laser. The problem was that after witnessing those events, the RX-01 Unicorn and the RX-02 Banshee were both confiscated and dismantled, so the only mobile suit left was the RX-03 Phoenix. The Federation wants the Phoenix because they built it. Louis and Co., more specifically Michelle from Louis and Co., want the Phoenix because she wants to use that power to transcend time and death for her benefit, alleged. And the Sleeps want the Phoenix for the glory of Zion or something like that. They never explicitly say why, they just want it. And I'll say it again, all of the plot elements by themselves sound amazing. So even though I don't usually like the summary route, I'll go ahead and recapitulate the story. We have a flashback with 3 kids who are called the Miracle Children because they could predict the colony dropped and save the entire town where they lived. Flash forward and we are now in the middle of Operation Phoenix Hunt with the Shizar team and the narrative Gundam trying to capture the Phoenix. They fail. We are then presented with information about the powers that the Unicorn displayed after the colony laser was fired, and on the other side, we also find out that there are still some Zion and Sleeps remnants that want to get to the Phoenix. Oh, and there's another Char clone named Sultan Akanen? Okay, moving on. With the machinery provided with Louis and Co., both the Federation and the Sleeps are guided to a colony where they find the Phoenix. Jonah is piloting the narrative with another set of add-ons, and the Sultan is piloting a Sinanju. Like full frontal, but a lot less cooler and not at all red. Sultan is crazy, so he starts firing inside the colony and everything starts to get very messy. Sultan is fighting the narrative and gets offended that the Gundam NT isn't using full psychoframe tech, so he calls the second Neo Zeon. Yes, the remnants of the remnants of the remnants of Zeon still managed to build a Neo Zeon. Even though we later learn that it's a prototype Neo Zeon handed by Louis and Co., that's why it was not painted red, but I digress. The second Neo Zeon starts to resonate with the narrative Gundam instead of the Sinanju and starts to merge, but the Phoenix stops them. By now, we start to realize that maybe Rita is not necessarily alive inside the RX-03, and since the operation was a complete failure, the Federation asks Michelle to spill the beans about everything. She then explains that Louis and Co. gave machinery to both the Federation and the Sleeps not to guide them, but to lure out the Phoenix in order to be able to capture it for herself, as she wants to unlock the key to immortality within the Phoenix. In other words, the ability of a psychoframe machine to absorb the soul of a dying person, as it had happened with the Phoenix and Rita, who at some point died but kept living as a more or less sentient mobile suit. On the psionic side of things, since the operation was a failure, Sion's Prime Minister tells Commanding Officer Erica to get away from the Sleeps so that they can take the blame as a terrorist group unassociated to the Republic of Zion. But Sultan overhears everything and kills the officer, succumbing then to a maniacal rage that could only be quenched by destroying everything in his sight. And, to be more effective, he decides to use the second Neo Zeon. He then aims to ignite helium tanks from Jupiter that are near, so that with the explosion, the debris travels to Earth and renders it uninhabitable. Obviously, the Federation sends a Shizar team with the narrative Gundam. They all start to lose. Michelle sacrifices herself to save Jonah, the Garanciers appear to save Yago, the Phoenix appears so that Jonah can reunite with a ghost Michelle and a ghost Rita, the Phoenix goes into control destroyed mode and stops Big Bad Evil Sultan, and just when the helium is about to explode, the Phoenix miraculously manifests wings of psycho energy and is able to stop the explosion and keep everything controlled. And yes, I know, everything is much more epic in the film. The thing is that we already saw a Unicorn mobile suit battling a Neo Zeon mobile armor and displaying miracle, godlike, super roboty new type powers. Oh yeah, and speaking of which, Banerjee reappears in a very impractical mobile suit that changes its arm every time that he shoots the beam magnum, and Minerva also reappears and reveals that the Unicorn was not dismantled, so we are kind of back in square one. And you see, that's my whole problem with Gundam narrative. It's repetitive and boring, as we already saw that. I really don't mind the whole super robot stuff. We've been seeing supernatural Deus Ex Machinas since Zeta, and super robots are super cool. You know, row, fight the power.
Row, fight the power. Crush the untouchable, break the unbreakable. Row, fight the power.
What I find super offensive is the fact that with some minor changes, the story is essentially the same as the end of Unicorn. Even the mobile suits themselves are like a watered-down version of the ones we saw in Unicorn, except the Phoenix, that it's really a unicorn, only shinier and with little wings. Director Yoshizawa said that one of his intentions was to change the presentation of the Gundams. In Zeta Gundam, it starts with a Mark II Gundam. Then Zeta Gundam appears. In Victory Gundam, it works its way up to the V2 Assault Buster Gundam. Everything keeps powering up. In NT, the first time narrative shows up is when it's at its flashiest. It only gets simpler after that. The opposite of the norm. Having things opposite of the norm, or just changing how it was presented, was how I tackled the challenge. If you watch with that in mind, I think you can spot the slight differences. I don't really get his way of thinking. I mean, we all know that the main objective of Gundam is to sell toys, but director Yoshizawa, in trying to do something transgressive and different, did something lackluster and boring that totally missed the point. The Gundam NT is absolutely not at all memorable. The second Sinanju stain is a huge step back from full frontal Sinanju. Hell, the second Neo Zeon is just a super blatant ploy to reuse the mold of the previous Neo Zeon, just now in white. Yona is a mix of the worst parts of Banerjee with the worst parts of Riri. And another Char clone? I mean, Sultan could just have been another crazy cyber new type for all that mattered. Or maybe even a Char fanatic. Why tell us that he's a failed Char clone? What does that even add to the whole narrative? Is this where the idea of the memory clone of Franchi Char gets planted for a future Gaia Gear anime? I really don't think so. What I really think is that the ideas were great. They just treated the whole story as if it was a Unicorn P Bandai repaint with a couple of different things and a new package. If they were already going to change the plot that Fukui told in the original Phoenix Hunting novel, why not change it in a completely different way in order to tell a true Unicorn sequel and Hathaway's Flash prequel story? It's very easy. The whole setting of the secret Phoenix Hunt operation could stay. Even Yona could have been piloting a repurposed mobile suit. But, for example, going the Twilight Axis route, why not have the NT Gundam be a salvaged RX-93 but with added pieces to conceal it? It would have been recovered by Louis & Co. instead of Anaheim, so that's why nobody knew. They could have even added psychoframe tech to look like the Verka version. Imagine this, Louis & Co. want to discover the power to transcend time and death, so they pour all of their resources to get all of the missing in action psychoframe mobile suits. They get a hold of the salvage remains of the new Gundam, and Michelle starts to push Yona to pilot it to capture the Phoenix. In their investigations, Michelle learns that a psionic leader going by the name Sultan Akanen is doing everything in his power to recover the Sazabi, as he is a Char fanboy that was too afraid to battle in the Axis shock, but now he's overcompensating by getting the whole Sazabi for two things: to pilot it as a way to demonstrate his will to carry out Char's legacy, and, more importantly, to try and decode Char's memory to have a combat guidebook with all of Char's experiences and strategies. Not a clone, but more like a biography, memoir, and strategy warbook. But since the Sazabi is incomplete, the Zeons also need the Phoenix to continue tinkering with experimental psychoframe tech. So now, instead of having a boring Gundam narrative and Sinanju Stain, we have a rebuilt RX-93 and the Sasabi searching for the Phoenix. Things could have gone more or less the same way with psycho energy resonances here and there, the revelation of Luinko ambition, but instead of having the big bad Neo Zeon again, why not have the final battle as the new Gundam narrative version against the Sasabi narrative version? And they could look super menacing like those recent kids, with Jonah and Sultan succumbing more and more to the tragedy, pain and suffering of all of the new type and cyber new type energy that is humming and resonating and spreading across space. All of the new types that are alive start to sense this brutal and negative energy, and we can even have silent cameos of Silent Mirai, Camille and Fa, Jura and Lina, even Ru and Bicha, Banerjee, Riri and Minerva, and also Hathaway. On the battlefield, we can also have cameos in the form of auras of all of the new types, cyber new types, and mobile suits and armors that died or were destroyed, except the Elmeth. Then we cut to the Phoenix flying at near light speed through a field of debris. But we know this area, it's familiar. It's Solomon. The Phoenix is flying in Solomon looking for the Elmeth. Why? There we see that Lala's spirit is humming and crying, and with that, just like in the OG series, she's amplifying all of the negative energy. She's whispering, why can't humans learn? Why can't humans stop causing pain to one another? Miracle after miracle after miracle, and people still can't understand each other. Those are the questions that Lala's spirit is repeating, but then the Phoenix touches the Elmeth, and from the cockpit we see Rita's ghost with Quest. Rita tells Lala that someone wants a word with her. Quest then tells Lala that she also knew both Amuro and Char, and even though they were both adults, they still had troubles. Quest explains that humans are not perfect, so perfect understanding can't be achieved in life. But as new types, they all have all the time to understand everything, and as entities without physical limitations, they can continue guiding everyone towards a better understanding of the future. New types are the imperfect and limited and all too human representations of hope, and where there's hope, there's power. Here we can cut to Hathaway saying that this is enough, that Char's revolution can't be forgotten, that humans must not get comfortable with their souls being weighed down by gravity. Lala then realizes that hope springs eternal. Not even death can bring down hope, so she enters the Phoenix cockpit with Rita and Quest and goes into awakened destroyed mode. Back on the battle, Sultan and Yona are all messed up with psychoframe crystallization happening in both mobile suits, and both are engulfed in a red aura with the spirits of all of the dead new types and cyber new types, all hating on each other. The Phoenix then arrives at the battle and stops them immediately. Yona, Sultan, you're disturbing all of my children, says Lala as she slowly and gently starts to spread the Phoenix wings in order to hug all of the red aura. I gave my life for hope, so I was the first new type to transcend the tears of time, and I consider you all my children. There's so much we need to learn, utters Lala as she is now hugging like a mother the whole psycho-energy sphere. After that, we see the new Gundam and the Sasabi completely deteriorate like the Sinanju, and Lala, before leaving the Phoenix with all of the new type and cyber new type souls with her, utters her last words. New type or not, the future belongs to people with a strong hope to bring forth the miracles, no matter if big or small. And there we have it. With just one sentence, Gundam's entire narrative can be changed again to one where it doesn't matter if you're a new type or not. It just matters that you have hope, more or less. That is why in Hathaway's Flash, new types were super scarce, and in F91 and Victory, they are barely mentioned. And also, Sunrise and Bandai could sell the RX-93 new Gundam Verkan narrative version and the Sasabi Verkan narrative version, just as they did with the Sinanju Stain and the Phoenix, but with cooler mobile suits. They just needed to think a little bit more and reuse the same elements, but with some plot twists and more creativity. That's my whole problem with the tedious Gundam narrative. Not the new type and psychoframe miracles, the boring repetitiveness. But you know what? We Gundam fans, like new types, never lose hope. And in 2021, in the middle of a brutal pandemic, Mafti's uprising began in one of the most beautiful and spectacular Mobile Suit Gundam movies. I'm talking about the film adaptation of Hathaway's Flash.
彼は危険人物だ。地球連邦政府の秩序を乱す者だ。
そうだね、クレス。僕は変わるよ。変えてみせるよ。
やってみせろよ、マフティー。
なんとでもなるはずだ。ガンダムだと。
なら言葉も一度描いて
逃がすか。
先行のハサウェイ。
身構えている時には死神は来ないものだ。
Again, I'm sorry for making you watch such long videos, but I was super bummed by Gundam Narrative. It was such a missed opportunity to make a commentary about all of the new types that exist in the franchise, to justify the pseudo-disappearance of them, to bring forth newer, more detailed versions of fan-favorite model kits, and even connect all of the Unicorn lore, especially all of the Phoenix lore, to all of the Hathaway's Flash lore, and really start with a clean slate, the 2nd century of the Universal Century Calendar. I hope you liked my fanfic retelling of Gundam Narrative, and I really want to read all about your expectations of Gundam NT and if they were fulfilled or not. And get ready, because next video is going to be all about Hathaway. And as you may or may not know, my name is Absa, and we can continue the conversation over at Twitter, where you can follow me at Absalonicus, and on Instagram, where I post pictures of my figures, my cats, and sometimes even myself. I'll be trying to talk more about anime, comics, and maybe even figures. And till next time, always remember that in fiction lies power, so let's use it to forge a new type of story, our hero's journey.